Israel's Prime Minister says the balance of power has been changed in the Middle East with its killing of Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah. Protests have been held in Lebanon, Iran and the Palestinian territories denouncing the attack which eliminated the Lebanese militia's leadership. Iran, Hezbollah's backer, has demanded a meeting of the UN Security Council over the killing. Meanwhile, Israel says it intercepted rockets fired from Lebanon. Benjamin Netanyahu warned there would be challenges ahead, but said his country had reached an historic turning point.
Israeli fighter jets dropped a series of bombs on Beirut's southern suburb Dahiyeh, targeting Hezbollah's top commander. Hezbollah confirmed that the explosion killed its leader, Hassan Nasrallah. He was the head of the Iran-backed militant group for over 30 years.
Yesterday, Israel killed the mass murderer Hassan Nasrallah, someone who was responsible for the murder of countless Israelis and many citizens of other countries, including hundreds of Americans and dozens of French citizens.
The strike set off loud explosions, sending thick red smoke into the sky. The aftermath on the ground? Devastation. At least 4 buildings were leveled, killing several civilians and injuring at least 90. Despite the human cost of the conflict, Israel said that it had no choice but to target Nasrallah.
Nasrallah was not just any terrorist. He was the central engine of Iran's axis of evil. He and his people were the architects of the plan to destroy Israel. But he was not only activated by Iran, many times he also activated Iran.
The bombings have left thousands homeless, some of them displaced more than once.
We were sitting at home in safety, and today we heard that the airport road was bombed. When that bombing happened, my children started crying and holding on to us. We were forced to leave our homes. We went out and we came here.
Israel's bombing of Lebanon heightens fears of an all-out regional war in the Middle East, especially with Hezbollah declaring that it will not back down.
Let's get more from our correspondent Emily Gordine in Jerusalem and journalist Stella Männer in Beirut. Welcome to both of you. Emily, let me start with you. Benjamin Netanyahu is talking about a turning point. How is that message going down in Israel?
Well, the assassination of Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, has certainly been seen as a military success here by many in Israel and essentially epitomizing Israel's war efforts against Hezbollah. In the last year, we've seen almost constant fighting between the two sides that then progressed to the sabotage of pagers and walkie-talkies in Beirut and across Lebanon, really, and the killing of dozens of commanders in Hezbollah. And now the assassination of its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, who is essentially the arch-enemy, or seen as the arch-enemy in Israel. So it's seen as a huge success, and at the same time we've also been hearing from hostage families their anger and their grief has not gone away. They accuse the government in Israel of distracting people's attention away from hostages, and they see a deal in Gaza as the only way out of this situation, really. But of course, you have to keep in mind that there are a lot of people in Israel who also do support this military effort, and they want to see more of it, essentially to be done with Hezbollah once and for all.
Right. That's the reaction inside Israel. Stella, how did Lebanese people react to Netanyahu's speech?
Well, it depends a little bit who you ask, because Nasrallah was an extremely controversial figure within Lebanon. Among the Shia community and Hezbollah members, he was extremely popular. People liked him because he was a very charismatic figure. But for many other Lebanese people, Nasrallah was the evil, the enemy. Many people saw him as the person responsible for dragging Lebanon into a war and for hijacking the state. So these people were quite happy to hear that Nasrallah is dead, and they are kind of hoping now that the organization is very weak now. But of course, among the Hezbollah members, people were very, very sad. They were mourning. We've seen the pictures of people demonstrating in the streets, and Lebanon has now called for 3 days of official mourning.
Right. I'm going to stick with you, Stella, because hundreds are fleeing inside Lebanon. They're sleeping on beaches and streets after Israel strikes. What help are they getting, if any?
Well, the situation here in Beirut is quite heartbreaking. The people are still out on the streets. I've talked to some of them myself. They fled by foot into the city center Friday night. Many of them are not even carrying more than a little bag with them. I've even seen some people who were barefoot. They really only have the bare minimum with them. But there are volunteers who are trying to help these people. I've seen a group of young volunteers yesterday who were distributing water to these people because it is still very, very hot here in Beirut and people are just out in public places. Other private initiatives are trying to find shelters or free apartment for these people. But again, it's always private people, volunteers who are doing this work because the state is failed, and this failed state is not doing its task and is not looking after the people.
Right. Emily, US President Biden called again for a ceasefire, but with all that's happening now, how likely is that?
Well, we've certainly seen the preparations for a possible grand invasions being made in Israel. We saw troops practicing at the border. We've seen reserve brigades being mobilized. We've also been seeing tanks and armored vehicles lining the border with Lebanon. And essentially also yesterday, the IDF's chief of command, Herzl Halevi, came out saying, warning that challenging days lie ahead. He said, quote, "The IDF is at peak readiness, both in defense and offense across all fronts, and is prepared for what comes next." Now, it's important to note here that even after the killing of Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, we've been seeing rockets come in, being launched from Lebanon towards Israel. So while Hezbollah might be weakened, it's not been eliminated completely. And the military in Israel is essentially getting prepared for what could be a possible grand invasion. This is essentially not just about securing its border, but also re-establishing deterrence in Israel. The question is just how will Iran and how will Hezbollah respond in the next few days?
Right. Emily, Gordine in Jerusalem, and journalist Stella Männer in Beirut. Thank you. Now, DW Middle East analyst Shani Rozanes joins me in the studio. Shani, good to see you again. We've been talking a lot about events happening on the ground. But yesterday, strong words from Netanyahu after the death of Nasrallah. What do you make of them?
Well, he wants to mark it as an historic turning point, and I think it's still yet to be seen. I mean, there's several things on the line still to be determined. For Israel, has it fundamentally changed the situation on the ground? Does it make the northern border of Israel, the one with Lebanon, is it safe now? Can Israeli citizens who were living there, over 60,000 of them who had to evict, can they come back? Has that dynamic that Israel has been struggling with finding a solution for decades, is the assassination of Nasrallah going to fundamentally change that? This also depends on what we'll be seeing in the next days, how deep Israeli operations are going to go and so forth. But I think it's too early to say that. And also we need to look at what it does to Hezbollah. I mean, has the death of the leader of the organization also killed the organization? I mean, we've been seeing, it still manages to fire rockets at Israel. So some of the military capabilities are definitely still there. How fast can it recover? Who would be the next person to lead it? It's also partially depending on that, and therefore depending on the Iranians, who will be heavily involved in that decision. So it's yet to be seen whether, because Israel has done that before. I mean, Nasrallah took his place after Israel assassinated his predecessor. So there's, even the Iranians themselves said yesterday, heads of organization are replaceable. So has fundamental changes happened? This is yet to be seen.
Right, and then as you say, I guess only time will tell. But we spoke earlier, speaking to our correspondent on the ground, and of course journalists on the ground in Lebanon. And, you know, the U.S. is still calling for a ceasefire, but somehow we still see sort of movements, you know, at the border. What does this mean? Are we expecting a ground invasion of some sort?
Well, if you talk to, if you hear what Israeli military officials say, they feel like this is a very rare opportunity now. You know, seeing Hezbollah at its weakest point ever, they feel like this is the only time to actually make fundamental changes that will mean basically miming Hezbollah from any capability of hurting Israel on the long run, even when there's new leadership. So they feel like this is a rare moment and they want to seize it. And it seems like maybe there's an understanding in the American side that it might be the right time, at least with some people in the administration. And we've been hearing also reports coming through the Americans of some activity along the border overnight. So Israel, even if it does operate on the ground, where Hezbollah has lots of strongholds, lots of support on the ground, it probably aspire to have it quick and forceful and done. Israel would probably not want it to last for too long. And I think that as we will see the days progress, we will probably see more and more news about how heavily involved Israel is on the ground in the south of Lebanon.
So Hezbollah was, of course, well, they said they wanted to keep attacking Israel as long as the fight in Gaza was continuing.
Correct.
We still know that Israeli hostages are still there. Where does this leave all of this?
Well, Eddie, that's exactly the question many Israelis are asking today and have been asking through today, yesterday. How has this, some would say in Israel, marvelous operation, I mean, how does it bring Israel closer to its main goal of bringing back the almost 100 people that are, 101 actually Israelis that are still kept in Gaza? How does it bring Israel closer to that, to solving the problem with Hamas? Of course, directly it doesn't have an effect, but indirectly it could have a very consequential effect in the sense that Hezbollah was the biggest ally that Hamas has had since October 7th. And when Israeli officials, they hope that when the leaders of Hamas, mainly Sinwar, sees how weakened Hezbollah is and how weakened the Iranian support has become, he will realize he's quite alone in his effort to drag Israel into an all-out war that has failed again and again since October. And that might lead him to agree to concessions and therefore, bringing back the hostages home. I think it's a bit of a convoluted, thought there, and maybe some sort of a design of things that has a good amount of wishful thinking. And I'm not sure this would be the one thing to break Hamas that has shown very strong resistance for many months now. But this is the hope, at least in Israel for now.
Right. Iran is vowing some sort of retaliation. We know, of course, that we're strong backers of Hezbollah, and now Hezbollah's leader is no more. What can we expect in the coming days from Iran?
I think that's the biggest question up in the air, because Hezbollah knows it cannot just leave things like that. I mean, Iran knows, because Hezbollah has been the main vehicle through which Iran was trying to hurt Israel, putting Hezbollah as a proxy arm right on the border with Israel, being able to mobilize, Hezbollah in order to basically fight some of Iran's fights when needed. So, and also for the stature and the symbolism behind that as the Shiite axis, we need to see. I mean, I think the Iranians would try. We've seen them also trying. They also have an open tab since July, the assassination of Hania. They will try to find a symbolic enough target that will show that they have responded without causing an all-out escalation.
Talking about the all-out escalation, that's the fear of Western countries, of everybody basically in the region. How likely is that?
Well, I think it's a question that we are, all pondering in the last couple of months already, probably since October 7th. How wider will this conflict go? But I think, surprisingly, we've been seeing that many of the actors, even people like actors like Iran that have been seen very adamantly against Israel, have been very cautious in how far they're taking this and how far they're getting themselves sucked into this Palestinian cause. Iranian response is yet to be seen, but the Americans are already sending their, enforcement to the region, sort of like for deterrence, hoping that would be a good enough of an investment without needing to get more involved in that. And it might be working. And I think the key now is, can Israel leverage this success that it has, this tactic success that it has in Lebanon, to bringing real change with Lebanon, but but also in Gaza, sort of creating new circumstances for this whole conflict to calm down. I think this is what the Americans would try to push for. So far, we see a very defiant Israeli leadership trying to push forward with more military offenses. But I think eventually there is no other way of finding a long-term solution. Israel will have to find some sort of an agreement with the parties involved.
Right. Always a pleasure. Shani Rozanes, PW Middle East analyst. Now, tens of thousands of people have fled southern Lebanon in recent days as the cross-border bombardment by Israel intensifies. Many are fleeing to other parts of the country, and more than 50,000 have crossed over the border into Syria. The targeting of residential buildings in Beirut have caused many families to flee their homes. They are now sleeping in makeshift shelters or on the streets of the capital. The United Nations World Food Programme said it had launched an emergency operation to feed up to 1 million people in Lebanon. Let's get more from Sabine Abiaad. She is the Regional Campaigns Coordinator for the humanitarian organization ActionAid. She joins us from Beirut. Hello, Sabine. Can you give us a sense of the humanitarian situation in Beirut?
Good morning from Beirut. The situation in Lebanon is really dire and alarming, and the window to prevent a full-scale humanitarian crisis is closing very rapidly. The needs on the ground are growing. Israeli attacks on Hezbollah targets have had terrifying effects on local civilians who have been forced to flee a place to another in search of safety. There are now few safe places in Lebanon. Attacks are covering increasingly large area. There are more than 800 people killed, thousands injured, and more than 200,000 people displaced, and more than 50,000 people living in shelter. But authorities in Lebanon are saying that the true number is much higher. It's almost 500,000 people who are likely displaced. So as I'm telling you, there's a huge need for humanitarian assistance. The needs on the ground are growing rapidly. People are in a state of extreme stress and panic, and also refuges are overcrowded because people are seeking shelter in some public schools.
Right.
All schools in Lebanon were shut down, so people are seeking refuge in schools. And local and international organizations are trying to support tens and tens of thousands of people. And this is what we're doing with our local partners on the ground, trying to support the displaced people in different locations in Lebanon with the basic needs like, of course, the shelter. We are helping them with mattresses, with blankets, with food, because people flee their home from the south and also from Beirut and parts of Bekaa with nothing in hand. They came with nothing.
So you're describing a very dire situation on the ground, and you say ActionAid is doing all it can to provide basic needs, food and water and shelter to those in dire need. This is based on the current situation. So what's the plan if the situation continues to worsen?
We will keep supporting people. We are working with our local partners on the ground. We are trying to support people in 3 different locations: in Bekaa, in Beirut, and in Tripoli, in north of Lebanon. We will try to adapt as much as we can and to be able, with the assistance of our partners and donors, to be providing more and more support to people in need. Things are escalating rapidly in Lebanon. And as I said, the needs on the ground are growing rapidly. And also people are in distress. So also a psychosocial support is needed for the displaced people. So also we will providing this kind of service in one of our center where we have a safe space in Bekaa.
Okay.
But also the staff and the partner staff are working also under pressure. Sometimes we have to hold our operations because of the situation and the intensity of the attacks that is continuing to rise.
Right. Sabine Abiaad, ActionAid Regional Campaigns Coordinator. Thank you very much.
Thank you.